Bible class. And good to see a few folks back scattered around. Be together. We had Sister Diana Rainey's funeral yesterday, or actually Friday night, and so all went well with that. Other than the fact that she's gone, and it's real sad. And but anyway, Brother Talbert and come up to me Friday night. Miss Jeanette, he's probably still back there at the doors, isn't he? And said, "Preacher, we got to quit meeting like this." I said, "Man, I know, I don't like it." And so we'll talk about death in just a moment in our text. But 1 Corinthians chapter 15, turn there if you would. And it's good to see everybody here this morning. Good to see everybody, and we are what a joy to be able to study the Bible. And so on our all of our children's ministry, they're celebrating everybody's birthday today. So they got birthday cake. And don't forget to be passing out gospel tracts. We are in, I haven't said something about it every single service, but we're in our harvest tract blast right now. And be working on somebody to get to church with you on Harvest Sunday. And so very, very important. And of course, if you're not involved in Trail of Adventure, we hope you'll get involved and make you a booth. The people ask me, "Do you got any booth ideas, preacher?" And I say, "Yeah, I'd jump in the Bible and pick a Bible story and make something. Get you cardboard and paint it up and make your decorations and all of that. Doesn't have to be a Bible story. We just ask that it be, if it's a life application story or just something from out there. I mean, you could be Huckleberry Finn if you wanted to be. Just make sure it's innocent, and we don't want to bring any. The world is inundated with witches and ghosts and goblins and that type of stuff enough, and so they get that when they get to Walmart, and so with that in mind, when they come here, we want it to be innocent and heavenly. That's kind of what we're looking for. People say, "Is it okay to carve a pumpkin?" And is it okay to put a smiley face on my pumpkin? And the answer to that question is yes. Just make sure that pumpkin is saved. All right? Make sure it's smiling and saved. And I would even suggest, if you want to, hopefully it went to the dentist. And, that type of thing. So, but just make sure the pumpkin is saved. And so with that in mind. But we don't really, I'm not a big one. And I understand that others sometimes will come to me and say, "Preacher, this bothers me." I've never been one to let the devil have things. I like taking things back from the devil and using it as an opportunity to point people to the Lord. And so I just you say, "Preacher, what do you be doing that night?" I tell you what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be having a blast serving the Lord Jesus Christ. That's what I'm going to be doing. It's His day. Every day is the Lord's. And this is the day that the Lord has made. I'm not going to give the day to the devil. Just not going to do it. And October 31st was on the calendar long before the Satanists grabbed it. God created that day long before the Satanists did. And the Bible tells us. I've got a Bible verse for that. In the book of Romans, "He that regardeth the day regardeth it as unto the Lord," and I regard the day as unto the Lord. And so with that in mind, we're just be praying that God will help us to pass out a lot of gospel tracts and point a lot of people to the Lord, and that is great. 1 Corinthians chapter 15. 1 Corinthians chapter 15. We're studying the proof. We have studied in the first 34 verses the proof of the resurrection, the proof of the resurrection, and we have now entered into, and we're about to enter into, the process of the resurrection. The process of the resurrection. Now, in the proof of the resurrection, we've looked at the historical proof, the power of faith, the power of the gospel. We've looked at the personal proof. We've looked at the doctrinal proof, and we've looked at the practical proof. So we have done all of that. Now let's look at the process of the believer's resurrection. Let's pick up at verse number 35. Verse number 35. But some man will say, and so this was what was generating this this question was generated in the church at Corinth as a obstacle to believing in the resurrection. In other words, he says, and here's the question that Paul says, and this was an actual question that had arisen. But some man will say, how are the dead raised up? So how does it happen? How can it happen? And with what body do they come? All right. Now we have a little we have an understanding, just like they had an understanding back in the days of Corinth, that when the soul and spirit leaves a body, that body instantly begins to what? Decay, to rot. All right, to decay. And so when and so they're saying, how's that possible? I mean, you're talking about people being raised from the dead. That's in the Old Testament period, and all of that. So how is it going to happen? Well, the process is miraculous, and I want you to see that here in verse 36. Now, first of all, notice Paul calls that a foolish question. He says, "Thou fool." That's a very foolish question. Thou fool, that which thou sowest is not quickened, except it what? Die. Now, the word quickened is a very important word, because to quicken means to make alive. It means to put life into it again. For example, the Bible tells us in the book of Ephesians that when we are saved, our soul is what? Quickened. It's made alive. All right? Do you understand that when you get saved body, soul, and spirit? Okay? We are a body, we are a soul, and we are a spirit. All three get saved. Okay? And so in that aspect, but that salvation process, for example, with the body is delayed. Okay? We have certain parts of our soul, our emotions. We have certain parts of that we haven't yielded to our salvation yet. All right? That's still ruled by the old nature. I thought Brother Sharp did a great job explaining that between the soul and the spirit a little bit in that aspect. But with that in mind, for example, how many of in the last 7 days has ever said something that you should not have said that did not please the Lord? Would you raise your hand? Okay, so even though that we're saved, our salvation is not ruling over every aspect of it. Now, here's what we need to realize: our body doesn't get to partake in the redemption of salvation until the resurrection. Okay? Romans chapter 8 talks about that the body is waiting on that redemption. The body, even though the body is what houses that sin nature, and it's still prevalent. And that is why our bodies are dying. That is why our bodies are not glorified at this moment, because it is waiting on that redemption. Your soul is saved, even though it doesn't always act saved. Your spirit is saved, even though it doesn't always somewhat act saved. Your body is not saved yet. It will not be saved until the resurrection. However, we can allow our spirit and our soul to dictate what our body does, and our body can act saved. Are you with me on that just a little bit? All right, and so watch this here. And so, first of all, what God says is the body has to die before it can be quickened. And we're talking about the body right now. All right? I read to you 1 Thessalonians chapter 14 when we began this section of the resurrection. And if you remember that the soul is saved, that's why when it dies, when it separates from the body, where does the soul go? Heaven, instantaneously. All right? To be absent from body is present with the Lord. Why? Because your soul's saved, your spirit's saved. Your soul and spirit go to heaven. All right? But the body stays behind. It dies. Now, the word die means to separate. All right? So what does it mean when your body dies? It means that your soul and spirit leave it. But watch this as he answers the process of the resurrection. He says here, "Thou fool, that which thou sowest is not quickened, except it die." All right? So the body has got to die before it can be made alive again. And he continues this thought. You'll see that this thought continues, verse 37, and that which thou sowest. Now that's interesting. I've had this question come to me no less than 4 times in the last 4 weeks. Preacher, does the Bible have anything to say about cremation? Cremation. And I said, not directly, but God does show us his judgment. Now, one person asked me last week, is it a sin to be cremated? And there's no command to not be cremated, so the answer to that question is no. All right? It is not a sin to be cremated because there's not a command not to be cremated. Okay? We need to understand that. But does God give us just commands in the Bible? No. He gives us principles, statutes, judgments, his mind on something. All right? Now let me ask you this in an aspect. Okay, so God does not expect us to live just by commands. He wants us to live by principles and by judgments and by statutes. Okay? And so when you study the Bible points in the direction of body burial in every case. Every case. All right? God himself buried Moses. What did they do with the body of Jesus? Buried it. Okay? All right? Now the question came to me, well, preacher, if they were cremated, does that mean that they're not going to participate in the resurrection? Absolutely not. That's not what that means. Okay? The body decays. Burial in the Bible was a testimony. It was a testimony that you believe there's a resurrection. The burning of the body is a pagan practice that the Philistines practiced in the Scripture and other ones. For example, the god of Moloch, they would take living babies and they would burn them alive. Okay? It was a sign of, we believe that after death it's all over. But God instituted burial, and that's why all the patriarchs, all of that, everything, it was a testimony that you believe something future is going to happen. All right? So if a person was cremated, does it mean they're not going to partake in the resurrection? That's not what it means. If a person is cremated, does it mean that it's a sin? That's not what the Scripture says. They're not necessarily breaking a command. But when you look at the Bible, and say, what does God prefer? What would God prefer? You will never find not one instant, where God or God's people practiced cremation. That is something that has developed from pagan philosophy into American culture, and it has crept into the church because it is what? Cheaper. Now listen to me carefully. Listen to me carefully. Since when does the Bible teach we make our decisions based upon the price of something? For the love of money is the root of all evil. And so here's the bottom line. People say, well, preacher, now, listen, I'm not trying to get on your enemy side today. For some reason, all right, there's 4 subjects that tick people off when I get on them. Alcohol, tithing, modesty and dress, and cremation and burial. I mean, man, I tell you what, the fangs come out. I mean, I almost had a lady slap me over cremation one time. Now listen to me carefully, okay? So, as you say, preacher, what are you going to do? Well, if they do what I desire for them to do with me, now I don't know what they're going to do with me when I'm gone, because I ain't going to be in it, all right? And that's the philosophy. The philosophy is, well, I'm not there. What does it matter? And I get that a little bit, but as we go to the Bible, we get this mindset that, well, am I breaking a command? No, you're not breaking a command, but you're also not following the mind of God on something. All right, you with me on that? I hope that they bury me, all right, so I can testify that one day I'm coming up out of that grave. All right. And so that is, and notice the statement. You say, well, preacher, where do you get that? Well, let me show you one of them right here. Watch what it says. Thou fool, that which thou, what's that word? What does it mean to sow something? It means to put it in the ground. Is not quickened except it die. Look at verse 37. And that which thou, what's that next word? What does it mean to sow something? It means put it in the ground. Thou sowest not that body that shall be. All right, did you catch that statement? So when you bury it, we buried Mrs. Rainey Friday morning. We buried her, okay? Now, we buried a body that it's not going to be the same body when it comes up again. Watch the illustration. And by the way, notice how God uses the word sow. Is he trying to tell us something? Okay, all right? And that which thou sowest not that body that shall be. And then he illustrates. Watch what he says here as he gives an illustration. And he says, but bear, what's that next word? Grain. So he's illustrating something. It may chance of what? Or some other what? All right, so when we bury grain, when we bury it, do we bury something and something else comes back up? But it's from the same, one and the same. So you bury the seed and grain comes up. So what Paul is saying, the bearing of the body for the resurrection, and that's the whole point of burying the body. It's for the resurrection. That's the point. He says you bury that body for the resurrection. All right? So just as you plant that grain in the ground, it comes up wheat. So the same concept. What you bury is not what's going to come back up. Are you with me on that? Have some of you all tuned me out already? Okay, all right. And listen, I'm just going to give you the Word of God. If you got mad at me, you need to get mad at God. God's the one that wrote the Bible, okay? All right? And just what happens, people get mad at preachers because they don't change the Word of God to match their ideology and their philosophy. I'm not going to do that for you, friend, all right? And here's just the bottom line. You do what you want to do, and I'll do what I want to do, and I'm going to give you what God says that we should do, all right? And he talks about sowing it, all right? And by the way, it's interesting. Let me give you this illustration. When Saul died, he died at the hands of the Philistines. You know what the Philistines did with his body? They hung his head on a wall and they burned his body. And the men of Jabesh Gilead went and got his bones. And you know what they did with his bones? They buried him, because that's what the people of God, the patriarchs, did. Interesting, all right? So watch this now. Just thought I'd give you one more thing to tick you off this morning. All right. I'm not trying to, but some of your looks, either you got up on the wrong side of the bed, and you're just not looking at me at the right time, the right way. I don't know, but maybe I'm interpreting it wrong. Okay, but watch this here. All right. He says it's going to come up. Verse 38. But God giveth it a, what's this? A body. God gives it a body. God gives it a body as it hath pleased him, and to every seed his own body. All right? So God has a body for in other words, in grain, when that seed is planted, God has created every body, all right? And he's got the corn, he's got the wheat, he's got this. Well, if he can do that in the natural world, can he not do that in the human world? Yes, he can. This is the whole illustration. God giveth it a body. Now, that's interesting. Watch this statement. God giveth it a body. All right. That's why somebody asked me last week, preacher, if somebody is cremated, are they going to participate in the resurrection? The answer to that question is yes. Okay. What about somebody died in a fire, house fire? What about somebody that was buried in the sea? Okay. And so it all disintegrates regardless. But here's the thing. When it comes up out of the ground, it's actually another body. The sowing is just the testimonial that you believe in what's going to happen in the future. Okay? All right? Say. Okay, so now watch this. Verse 39. All flesh is not the same flesh, but there is one kind of flesh of men, and another flesh of beasts, and another of fishes, and another of birds. So he uses a agriculture illustration. Then he uses an animal illustration. Okay? God has created different bodies, all right? And by the way, he did this in the order of creation. All right, if you go to Genesis chapter 1, you will find that God made the agricultural and the land and the flowers and the grain and all of that first. Then he made the birds and the animals and the human and all of that. So he divides those into two. So Paul uses Genesis 1 as an illustration. Notice how God has given everything a body. And we go, and so he takes us back to Genesis chapter 1. But then he makes this statement in verse 40. There are also celestial bodies and bodies terrestrial. All right, celestial means heavenly. Terrestrial means earthly. Celestial means heavenly. Terrestrial means earthly. All right? So he's establishing a fact. Notice how God created different bodies. He did it in the agricultural world. He did it in the animal and human world. Now, he's fine-tuning what he's teaching. God has two different realms of bodies, terrestrial and celestial. All right? Heavenly and earthly. There are also, verse 40, you still with me this morning? There are also celestial bodies and bodies terrestrial, but the glory of the celestial is one, and the glory of the terrestrial is another. They're two separate bodies, designed for two separate purposes, and they were both made by God, and what God makes is good, right? So they both have a glory, all right? Now, he goes to the sun, moon, and stars to illustrate. Verse 41, there is one glory of the sun, and another glory of the moon, and another glory of the stars. For one star differeth from another star in glory. That's another part of creation. So he's just showing how God has made different bodies, if you will, in the heavens, in the agriculture, and in the human and animal world. And they all possess a different type of glory. This is what he's saying. All right? Now, Paul's answering the question, how is there a resurrection? So he's outlining this. He's going back to the basics. He's going back to spiritual elementary school and teaching this man who's saying a foolish statement, how's this going to happen? So he takes the created bodies of the heaven, the created bodies of the agriculture, and the created bodies of the walking world, and he says, God made different bodies in all aspects, and they all have a specific glory. All right, and so we see that. So now look at verse 42. Now he brings it back into focus. So also is the what? Of the dead. All right, now what has he established in those three illustrations? He's established that he has created different bodies. And when a person dies, they die in one body, but when they raise in another body. You with me on that? And each body had its own glory. The earthly one had its glory, and the heavenly one's going to have its glory. All right? Watch this. Verse 42, so also is the resurrection of the dead. All right? He says, it is, there's that word again, what? Sown in what? Corruption. What does it mean to be sown in corruption? It means to be sown in a sinful state, a decaying state, a dead state. It is sown in corruption. Watch it now. It is raised in what? In a non-dead state, in a non-sinful state, in a non-decaying state. You with me on that? What's Paul alluding to here? It goes down one body, it comes up another body. It's different. It goes down with one glory and it goes up with another glory. I use Mrs. Rainey because that's the last funeral I just did. Did she possess a certain glory? Sure she did. She was a wonderful lady. Smiling lady. Happy lady. Serving God lady. And all of that was glorified at her funeral. But it still went down in corruption. We sowed it in corruption down at Bushnell. But God says it'll be raised a different glory, a different body in incorruption. You still with me? Everybody here? Okay. Look at verse 43. It is sown, there's that word sown again, in what? Dishonor. All right? So let me ask you a question. In a sinful body, how many here have ever done anything to dishonor God in your body? Would you raise your hand? You think Mrs. Rainey ever did anything to dishonor God in her body? She did, all right? Maybe she had the smallest list of any of us, right? But she still had it, all right? It is sown in dishonor, but it is raised in what? In glory. It's raised in glory, okay? That's a wonderful word. I love that word glory because that word glory describes heaven. And so what does it mean in raised in glory? It means it will be raised, all the dishonor. When the body raises, there'll be no dishonor in it whatsoever. It'll be fit for glory, okay? It'll be fit for glory, all right? It is sown in dishonor. It is raised in glory. Watch this now. It is sown in weakness. Weakness. The flesh is weak. It is sown in weakness. It is raised in what? What was the weakness that it was sown in? Death. Have you ever realized, have we come to the conclusion that none of us can keep death from happening? We can muster up all of our own personal strength we can, but we cannot stop death from coming. We can't stop sickness from coming. We just can't do it. Our body is weak because of sin. But it is sown, it is buried in weakness, but it is raised in what? Power. Power. The ability. It's different. The total opposite of weakness. Watch this here. Verse 44. It is sown this is, watch it now, a what body? Natural. Now what does that mean? It means it was birthed in a natural format. Natural birth, all right? In other words, it's a body that came from another body. All right? Adam's body, all right? It is sown a natural body. Watch this now. Here's the big kicker. Understand it. It is raised a what? So it's sown in the terrestrial, but it's raised in the celestial. Okay? It's not the same body that comes up. Okay? That's why the question. I read a book one time where people said that people are cremated. They don't get to go in the resurrection. There's no Bible evidence of that. That's the dumbest thing I've ever. That's stupid to write something like that because it's not the same body that comes up again. The whole point of burying is not a matter of. It's not going to affect the resurrection. It's all in testifying of what you believe is coming. Does that make sense? Yeah. And so, or what you think is not coming. And I wish that the pagan financial concept of all of that didn't sweep through the minds of God's people. I wish we'd get our philosophy from Bible Street rather than Wall Street. Does that make sense? Okay? But as we think about this, he says here, and as we look at this, it comes up a spiritual body. It's not the same body. It's not the same one. He says there, watch this, verse 44, there is a natural body and there is a what? You have two bodies if you're saved. God's got a body waiting on you. And you've technically, I don't know how this works, somehow, but when we get into 2 Corinthians, you're going to find that you've actually got three bodies. You got your natural body, then you got your heavenly body that you go to if you die before the rapture. 2 Corinthians 5:1. If this body be dissolved, we have a body not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. And maybe that body and somehow the body that's going to come up out of the ground is somehow one and the same, and maybe you get half of it up there and the other half down here, and it all comes. I don't know. Okay? I don't know. But you have a spiritual body that's waiting on you, and that spiritual body will not have natural process, will not have weakness, and it will not have corruption, and it will not have dishonor. It's a sinless body that's going to come up out of the grave. Okay? All right? So literally, and think about the miracle of God. That's why Paul calls this guy a fool. Think about the ability and the miracle of God. I mean, come on. If he, are you still with me? If he can save the soul and spirit, can he not do this with the body? And this is what he says is going to happen. All right? Look at verse 45. And so it is written. Now he's going back to what was already put in chapter 15 and in the Old Testament. The first man, Adam, was made a living what? Okay. God breathed into man the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Adam was the first living soul to ever be. All right. This concept that there was another race prior to Adam is the only thing that existed before Adam was an angelic race, and that is it, an angelic being. But Adam was the first human being to ever be. And so it is written, the first man Adam was made a living soul Watch this now. The last Adam was made a quickening spirit. Who is the last Adam? Jesus. Now, get this. When you get saved, you become partakers of the last Adam. Before you're saved, you're a partaker of the first Adam. After you get saved, you're a partaker of the last Adam. Keep that in mind. Because by one man, sin entered into the world. By one man, by one man, souls are saved. All right? One man plunged us into sin. One man pulls us out of sin. That's why you better get off of Buddha, you better get off of Muhammad, you better get off of all of them, because it's not multiple men that pull you out of sin. One man plunged you into sin, one man pulls you out of sin, and that one man is Jesus Christ. You with me on that? All right? Now watch this, okay? And so it is written, the first man, Adam, was made a living... This is why I love Sunday school, because we can't get this detail in church sometimes. The first man, Adam, was made a living soul. The last man was made a quickening spirit. Now, what does that word quickening mean again? So he makes your spirit alive. Okay? He makes your soul and spirit alive. Verse 46. Howbeit, that was not first which is spiritual, but that which is natural. And afterward, that which is spiritual. Well, we know that. You must be born physically before you can be born spiritually. Right? Okay. We understand that. But because the natural was first, that's why we have to die. The natural man has to die before the saved man can live. And by the way, there's a spiritual concept there. That's why Paul said in the early part of this, before we ever started this conversation, I die daily. Because when you and I die, Christ lives. When you and I live, Christ dies. In an essence of our everyday, day-to-day life. That's just a little thing I threw in. Don't get that confused with I'm just talking about our everyday life. Now, verse 46, verse 47. The first man is of the earth, earthy. All right, God made him from the dust of the ground. The second man is the Lord from heaven. All right, so what happens when your first body dies? Your natural body dies. What happens to it when it dies? It becomes corrupt, and it becomes what? Dust. It goes back to the dust of the ground, okay? Just like it was made. It was made from the earth. Your second body wasn't made in the earth. It was made where? In heaven, all right? This is why I say that maybe there's some part of that body we get to go to early. And so it's not made with earthly products, okay? It's not a body made of dust. It's not, okay? So keep that in mind. So we're talking about the process. He's just giving us the logistics of this, all right? The first man is of the earth. Your body is, when I did it, I checked on it. You talk about this for self-esteem. You know what, when I checked it, I don't know what it is now. I think it's like, it may be, I don't know what it would be worth now, but when I checked on it, the body in material is worth like $13. You ain't worth much. You're worth more dead than you are alive, friend. All right? It's earthy. All right, it's just natural products. All right, that God made. He made it from the dust of the ground. But the new body that you'll get is made in heaven. All right, and so look at verse 49. And as we have borne the image of the earthy, we shall also bear the image of the what? Our new body's going to look different. Now the Bible does say that we will know as we were known. So our heavenly body will have reflections of our earthly body to have that resemblance, but we're going to bear a new image, okay? Who do we look like right now? We look like Adam. Who are we going to look like in this one? Jesus, okay? We're going to look like him. He's the last Adam. We're going to bear his image, all right, which is a glowing image. Remember when they saw him on the Mount of Transfiguration? And they needed sunglasses. Okay? When you see him in Revelation chapter 1, it was a glowing image. Remember what Moses was doing after he spent 40 days with Jesus up on the mountain? He come down from the mountain. What was he doing? He was glowing. Okay? And so I got good news for you. Some folks will finally have a smile on their face. Some of them will finally be happy. Yeah. But with this, they're gonna bear the image of Christ. All right. I've heard people say we'll look exactly just like Christ, and the truth is that is true. But the Lord, the Bible indicates that we do not lose our distinctiveness. It's just our distinctiveness will be purged with no sin anymore. Okay, and so it will look like heaven. Look at verse 48. As the earthy, such are they also that are earthy, as is the heavenly, such are they also that are heavenly. Now let me stop and illustrate this for just a moment. When Peter, James, and John were on the Mount of Transfiguration, and Jesus transfigured into his glorified body, which is what we will have. Our body will be glorified. Okay, it'll be a glorified body. Now follow with me. Who showed up with Jesus from heaven on the mount? Elijah and Moses. Let me ask you this question. Did they still have their name? Were they still recognizable as them? So you see what I'm talking about? They were in their glorified body, but they were still Moses and they were still Elijah. It's interesting to me that God says, I'm not the God of the dead, but I'm the God of the living. He said, I am the God of Abraham. I am the God of Isaac. I am the God of Jacob. They're still Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They've been in heaven a long time when Jesus made that statement, and he left them to come down. They're still Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's interesting that when the man in hell in Luke chapter 16 was talking to Abraham, he still called him Abraham. Now here's the bottom line. I don't think my name will be Rex in heaven. I don't think don't think your name will be Lewis in heaven or your name will be David in heaven. I think we get a new name. And so because remember when Simon, what did Jesus do with Simon? Changed his name to what? What did he do with Abram? Changed his name to what? Abraham. What did he do to Sarai? Changed her name to what? Sarah. And so we find him, you think about that, there's a new name written down in glory. Maybe there's more to that new name than we think about. And so I think that we will actually, I think when we got saved, we got a heavenly name. And we will find out that heavenly name when we get to heaven. That's just Pastor Rexology right there, okay? All right, I won't argue with you on that point. But that's just my speculation. Now, all right, look at verse number 49. And as we have borne the image of the earthy, we shall also bear the image of the heavenly. So we're going to reflect who made it. We reflect Adam right now, and that's why we have to struggle with Adam's sin. Adam disobeyed God, therefore we struggle with our disobedience. All right? But when we get into our heavenly body, we will reflect Jesus Christ. And what sin did Jesus commit? None. That's why our new bodies will never commit another sin. Even in the millennial reign, we'll have the same body in the millennial reign, no sin. We'll have that same body in the new heaven and new earth, no sin, because it was made by Christ. And so we think about that. I'm kind of at a stopping point. I will kind of give you an introduction here about the program of the believer's resurrection. But before I do that, is there any questions? Is there any questions? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You don't want to know what he said, yeah. Anyway, he said that he thinks my name in heaven is going to be T-Rex, and yeah. So anyway, you know what Rex means? It actually means king, yeah. And so I had made my wife mad one time, and she let me know I am not a king. And anyway, but all right. So, but anyway, that's well, I'm honored that you would think that. But anyway. So the Lord bless you. Yes, sir. Well, let me do this while I've got my. I have a lot of. Let's see. It's going to reflect the glory here of. What verse were we looking at with that word glory? Help me out. 40, 39, and 40. So let's just do this here. Let me give you an actual Greek definition of the word glory real quickly. Verse 40, and the glory of the terrestrial is another. And so there is one glory. Glory is in wide, objectively, dignity, honor, praise, worship. Dignity, honor, praise, worship. And that's what's going on in heaven: honor, praise, worship. When Jesus showed up in his glorified body, I mean, man, they went to worship. I mean, Peter said, let's build temples, when he saw the glorified bodies, even of Moses and Elijah. So it is, glory means something worthy to be worshiped, something worthy to be praised. And so good question, yeah, good question. Not that we will be worshiped, we will do the worshiping, but with that in mind. Yes, please don't forget to fill out your cards in front of you just for this class here. Go ahead and reach and get your communication card, and we'll turn those in separately. Keep in mind, you don't have to, this is how I pray for you. But how we're doing it is, if you're in the auditorium, we just turn it in early. That way they can find out who was in this auditorium Bible class. And then so if you go ahead and fill that out and turn that in, and that would be great. And it still ends up on my desk and just in a side-by-side pile there. Was there a question over here, Miss Kathy? Yeah. Yeah. The spirit and the soul, that's not something, some people make a big deal of that. The spirit and the soul are almost one and the same, but they do have different, in other words, our soul is that which, our soul is that part of us that succumbs to the sin nature. The spirit is that part that's the part that Jesus really possesses after we get saved. He's a quickening spirit. We accept him. He that worship God must worship him in spirit and truth. So when we come to church, it's our spirit that worships the Lord. Our soul does too, but our soul can rebel against our spirit. And that soul is the soul is that part of our emotion a little bit. The soul is that deciding factor. I will do this or I will not do that. The Bible talks about the spirit of a man as the candle of the Lord. If our soul's not right with God, sometimes our spirit doesn't get right with God, and our spirit, the spirit is what sometimes people see like with anger and that type of thing. Our soul is what lives forever. Our spirit does too. But when he breathed in a man the breath of life, he became a living soul. And so they're almost one and the same. Some people believe that even the soul and spirit separate, but there's just no Bible indication on that. We do see where the soul and spirit separate from the body, but we do not see anywhere in Scripture where the soul and spirit separate. They stay together. The unsaved have a spirit. They do. The unsaved have a spirit, but it's dead. It's a dead spirit, and it's a dead soul. Because if your spirit's dead, your soul's dead. Jesus said you're dead in your trespasses and sin. So, when we accept Christ and our spirit gets saved, it makes our soul saved. And so they're kind of they're like your. It's like your big toe and little toe. They both have different functions, but they're on the same foot. It's kind of like that. It's they're inseparable, but they both have a function. Yeah. So way to determine that about your soul is look up if you want to know what does my soul do and what does my spirit do, look up every verse in the Bible that refers to the soul, and then look up every verse in the Bible that refers to the spirit, and then you could just do a chart and say, oh, so this is what my soul does and this is what my spirit does. And many times they're connected together, and sometimes they're David talked about his soul hurting. His soul hurted. That's because that's where the seat of our emotions are at. And then the Bible says that the spirit of man is the candle of the Lord. In other words, what many times you and I see, we see a person's spirit. All right, and that lets us know what's really going on in the inside into the soul. Because their spirit, if they're mean-spirited, well, that lets us know what's going on in the inside. If they're happy, that's what's going on in the inside. If they're angry, that lets us know what's going on in the inside. And God says that the candle of the Lord, I actually reveal what's going on in the inside of a man by their spirit. Okay, so with that in mind, so when somebody's cantankerous and angry and mean and the candle of the Lord's saying, look at that, look what's going on the inside, all right. And so, but when they got joy and happiness and peace, that's all part of the Spirit. And so the candle of the Lord comes across and says, see, now look what's going on inside of that person, So with that in mind, does that make sense a little bit? Yeah. So in a nutshell. Anything else? Yes, ma'am. I'm almost out of time, but we'll shoot for one more. No significance at all. It was a matter of putting that body in a position where it proves that there is a resurrection, and because they enclosed that, the God does say the word sown, but there's no significant difference at all, because they would consider that as sowing that body. They would carve those tombs out, and they was still putting it into the earth, and so it was that's how they viewed that. So it's one and the same. Yeah. All right, we got to quit. Good questions. We'll pick up in verse number 50 next week, and we will finish what's called the program of the believer's resurrection. The program of the believer's resurrection, and I think you'll enjoy. I didn't get to that death thing this week, so we'll have to get to it next week. So we'll look forward to that. Father, Lord, we thank you for the day. We thank you for your blessings, Lord, and we just ask you to, Lord, help us to reflect what's coming one day. And we love you. Thank you for all you do in Jesus'